Good evening, give a time, and Boker Tov in Kansas City. We've got folks from Carmiel to Kuwait and from San Diego to Stockholm, Sweden, already with us here for this exciting next episode of our virtual tour of Israel. I'm here with my good friend Reuven Solomon. My name's Wayne Firestone. I'm the executive director of the America-Israel Friendship League, and I would much rather be in Tel Aviv than talking about Tel Aviv, but today we're going to join together as a community and celebrate memory, sights, sounds, streets. Now, some people refer to Tel Aviv as the city that never sleeps. So why don't you tell us, when you remember, how late you stayed up in Tel Aviv, okay? We won't press you for details on who you were with or why you were out so late, but was it on Dizengoff? Was it on Shankin? Were you watching the sun come up on the seashore? Was it one of the late nights of White Nights festival in Tel Aviv? Tell us what you remember about how late you stayed up in Tel Aviv, and if indeed you experienced the late night festivities of Tel Aviv, a whole nother side of this wonderful, vibrant city. So today, we want you all to be engaged. We're going to cover a lot of different ground, even though it's really sort of a tiny part of the city. So, Reuven, I know you're going to try to cover two cities that are joined at the hip. So, take us on the tour.
Erev Tov for those where in places that it's already evening. And good afternoon to all of you, all of my friends of the AIFL. Very, very glad to be with you once again on a virtual tour to Jaffa, Joppa, Yaffo, many names for the same place, and Tel Aviv. And whenever one mentions Tel Aviv, one says Jaffa Tel Aviv or Tel Aviv Jaffa. And there's a very good reason for that. And the reason is, of course, that Tel Aviv is really a child of Jaffa, born of Jaffa, but the child has become bigger than its mother, and thus Tel Aviv, paying respects to its beginnings, adds Jaffa to its name. So when you see Tel Aviv mentioned, you say Tel Aviv Jaffa. And we're going to be trying to visit Tel Aviv as much as possible, but I have to tell you in advance that most of the time that we have available is going to be spent in Jaffa, because it is really a city where that goes back much, much longer than Jaffa, approximately 5,000 years more than Tel Aviv. So obviously more time is going to be spent on Jaffa. And for those of you who wanted more of Tel Aviv, we may revisit Tel Aviv at a future time. But we're going to start our tour with a tour of one of the oldest port cities in the world, Jaffa. Notice the names that are up there on your screen: Yaffo, Jaffa, Joppa. Yaffo, the Hebrew; Jaffa, the Latinized, anglicized name for Yaffo; and Joppa, the Romanized name, the Roman name as it appears in the book of Acts. We call Jaffa the city of legends, and in Hebrew, Yaffo actually hints at the Hebrew word Yafa, beautiful. But most of us believe that the name came from the legend tradition that this ancient port city was actually established by the son of Noah, Yefet. And if indeed Yefet was the founder of the city, then it is an ancient port. And in fact, archaeology actually gives some weight to this legend, because the earliest archaeological evidence of settlement in Jaffa is from the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE. Now, Jaffa and Tel Aviv, Jaffa, is situated, as you will see in the map coming up now, on the west coast of Israel with the Mediterranean, almost in the middle of the country, not quite in the middle, but we call the area of Tel Aviv, Jaffa, the center, the central area. And you see what I meant when I said at the beginning that when we mention Tel Aviv, we also add Jaffa. But Jaffa today, in reality, is a suburb of Tel Aviv, a neighborhood of Tel Aviv. When Tel Aviv begins in 1909, it begins as a separate entity. But the first breakaway from Jaffa was much earlier, and we will talk about that when we get to our Tel Aviv section. But now I want to launch into the ancient times of Jaffa, where from the early Bronze Age, we skip almost 1,000 or plus 1,000 years to the time of the Egyptians being overlords of this Canaanite port. From around 2,500, the Egyptians had rulership over the Canaanite port, and around 1470 BCE, the Canaanite kings and rulers in their towns refused to pay their taxes to Egypt. And this is when Thutmose III comes to enforce Egypt's rule. And he comes, and we know this story from this document, part of which you're seeing on your screens, called the Papyrus Harris 500, that is in today's London Museum, but it is actually the very first, it's cartouche on papyrus, and it is actually the oldest written document we have of warfare, written by one of the commanders of Thutmose III, about how Thutmose manages to take Jaffa. The fleets come, of course, from Alexandria to Jaffa and find that the Canaanite town has walls and a fortress that are pretty hard to penetrate. And after a long sea siege, Thutmose leaves large wicker baskets on the shores of Jaffa, and the ships seem to turn around to head back to Egypt. The commander writes that, as was the practice of the time, incidentally, when one tried to do something that would offend the other party and didn't succeed, one would pay a penalty. Sorry, we did this, we'll leave you something behind. And thus, this commander of Thutmose writes that the Canaanites drag in these large wicker baskets, and you guessed, out of these wicker baskets jump Egyptian soldiers, taking over the gates, flinging them open to the Egyptian forces that are hiding behind the walls of the fortress, and that's how Jaffa falls. And that's the very first written recording of warfare on the taking of Jaffa. What you're seeing here is the tomb of Thutmose III. After Thutmose, of course, comes an important visitor to Jaffa, and his name is Ramses II, the same Ramses that we associate with the Exodus. When he is here, he builds an Egyptian fort around 1300 BCE, before the Exodus, and here he builds an Egyptian fort whose mud brick foundations can be seen to this day, and he erects a victory arch, not the arch you're seeing in front of you, that's a replica, of course, with hieroglyphics that tell the story that he was here to dedicate it. And here, the arch itself, of course, a replica, bits and pieces of it are in the London Museum and in Istanbul. But this is part of the archaeological excavation of Jaffa. We're going to be fast forwarding a little bit after Ramses and after the Exodus to the time of Solomon, when Solomon uses Jaffa as a port to bring in, and Tel Kasila as well, a little south of Jaffa, to bring in goods to build the second temple. And when he brings in all these goods, they're of course taken off in Jaffa and heading up to Jerusalem. But it is in the Solomonic period and after the Solomonic period, when the kingdom of Israel breaks into South Kingdom and based in Jerusalem in the north, that the story of Jonah takes place during the time of the Israelites. And Jonah, you may remember, actually sails out of Jaffa, and he's supposed to go to Nineveh, but he cheats and he goes in the opposite direction. You know the story. I don't have to repeat the story to you. But the whale you saw, this is, of course, an artist's depiction of Jonah and the whale, but the whale you will see in the next slide is the whale waiting for us at the entrance of Jaffa, a work of the artist, the American-Israeli artist, Ilana Gur, that decorates the entrance to Jaffa. From the time of the split in the kingdom, of course, the Assyrians in around 731 BCE conquer, and that's the end of the Israelite period for now. The next period we're going to jump forward to is the time of Hellenization, when Alexander the Great comes marching through 332 BCE and conquests the great areas of land. And in Jaffa, he comes all the way, incidentally, down from Lebanon and Tyre along the coast. And this is probably when the Greek legend of Andromeda is actually relocated just where you're seeing it on those rocks off the shore of Jaffa. The legend of Andromeda relocated from a vaguely mentioned Ethiopia to Andromeda's rock in Jaffa. An authentic Greek legend. You see the flag on the rock. And, you know, even to this day, as Mark Twain said, the fisherman will take you out to that rock and show you the chain marks of where Andromeda was chained. This Greek legend, to have a quick recapping, is of course about the beautiful daughter of Cassiopeia and Sisyphus, who they boast is more beautiful than the mermaids of the sea, angering Poseidon to no end. And there was only one thing to be done. The residents of this port decided, and that was to sacrifice the beautiful Andromeda. So she's chained to those rocks that you saw in Jaffa, according to the legend. But fortunately for her, she had a suitor. His name was Perseus. And he borrows a pair of winged sandals from another god, Mercury. And these winged sandals, called Nike, help him rescue the beautiful Andromeda. Now, I'm sure you realize that there are many different versions of the same legend, Greek, Roman, and all sorts of alterations to the legend. But in Jaffa, we like the legend based on Andromeda's rock in Jaffa. And you will see in Jaffa many neighborhoods, some neighborhoods and buildings and so on, remembering this legend of Andromeda. From the Greek period, of course, we go to the Hasmonean period. And I know what you're thinking, what's that doing here on a tour to Jaffa? But it's connected. The Hasmoneans, of course, give way to the Romans in 67 BC under the guise of Pompey, and that begins the Roman period. It's during this Roman period where the Jews have still got now, once again, controls and rights in this port city, that Herod the Great, around 30 BC, decides to renovate the temple. Now, there's a legend about a man called Nicanor, an Alexandrian Jew, who donates 2 beautiful gates to the temple that Herod is renovating. And he wants to accompany these gates, wooden gates overlaid with bronze, and he wants to accompany these gates to Jerusalem, to take them all the way up to Jerusalem. And this legend, incidentally, I have to mention, is of course referred to in the Mishnah and the Talmud. Yomah 38a talks about Nicanor's gates and the legends of these gates and the miracles that took place in these gates. But the Talmud recording talks about them being taken to the port of Akko and not Jaffa. This, many of us are convinced that is a miscopy or misunderstanding, because one would never take from Alexandria, if you look at the map, one would never take anything destined for Jerusalem all the way north to Acre to be, or Akko to be dragged back to Jerusalem. So most of us believe that this is a misprint, miscopying, and it's actually Jaffa, just as Solomon brought all the goods into Jaffa, that Nicanor's gates are heading for. But on the way, the ship gets caught in a storm, and in those days, they did some crazy things. Sailors, when they were caught in a storm, they thought that the best way to survive it was to make the ship as light as possible. We know it's exactly the opposite. You need some ballast to survive a storm. But they would toss cargo over, and that brings us back to the story of Jonah. They would toss cargo over the ship to make its survival, as they thought, more likely. And all the cargo goes over, and then one of Nicanor's gates. The legend goes that he throws himself on the other gate saying, "No way, I'm going to take at least one gate into the temple with me." And as the ship docks in Jaffa, the second gate is washed ashore right beside the ship, undamaged except for the oxidization of the bronze and copper. And these gates make it to Jerusalem and are placed in the renovated temple of Herod the Great. Nice legend. And to this day, anyone making models of the temple will have the bronze gates eroded because of the miracle of Nicanor's gates. And you know, sometimes in Israel, you have some wow moments, and these wow moments happen when legend, Talmud, writings, and stories are confirmed by archaeology. And in the next slide, you're going to see again, this of course slide is of the temple in Jerusalem, rebuilt Herodian. But in this slide, you're looking at the grounds of the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus, and at a tomb that is inscribed, Tomb of Nicanor. Now, there may have been more than one Nicanor. So we don't know if it's the Nicanor, but we do know because in a neighboring cave where ossuaries were stored is a very beautifully decorated ossuary, a bone box, inscribed, Alexander, son of Nicanor, maker of the gates. So we have archaeology linking up with stories and legend of gates that made it all the way from Alexandria to Jaffa and all the way to Jerusalem. Now, Jaffa is most important to many pilgrims because of an event that is described perhaps in around, and we'd skip from, as I said, from 30 BC now to about 35 AD, 35 CE if you prefer, to what makes Jaffa important for Christian pilgrims. You're looking at the slide of a doorway into a house marked as the house of Simon the Tanner. And of course, no one in their right mind would tell you that that is the way the house looked in the time of Simon the Tanner. But you'll see on the doorway a yellow sign with the black and red writing on it that declares this site as an archaeological excavation. The archaeological excavation going down into the basement of this house came up with 3 sarcophagi. But these sarcophagi were in secondary use. They were no longer used for burial, but they were used for soaking something in because they were stained. They had stains, and upon analysis, these stains were of soaking leathers. In other words, this was a tannery. Now, this tannery belonging to Simon the Tanner, according to belief, is at the very edge of Jaffa. And why is it so important? It's important for those familiar with the story in the book in Acts of how Peter comes from Lydia, Lod, the airport today, to Jaffa to administer a Tabitha. Dorcas was her name in Greek, who was on her deathbed. He manages, when he gets here to Jaffa, she's already dead, but he resurrects her, and then he goes to the house of Simon the Tanner to rest on the roof, and perhaps where that door is now is perhaps where the roof was in those times, because the basement, the rest of the house would be the basement of the basement. And there, according to Acts, he has a revelation, a vision. He falls asleep in deep sleep. He has a vision of a sheet lowered down to him by its 4 corners. I always remember, I always envisage talit, if you like, but lowered down by its 4 corners, with all sorts of unkosher foods in it, like shrimp and prawn and piglets and so on and so forth, and a voice telling him, Peter, rise, kill and eat. Simon Bar Yonah, rise, kill and eat. And he says, no way, this is not kosher. This happens 3 times. And the final time, he is told nothing that God creates is not kosher. And then he wakes up by a knocking on the door. And the knocking on the door is messengers from Cornelius of Caesarea. The Acts tell us a God-fearing Greek. And he, in a previous vision, knows that he should answer the call. Now, you need to realize that at that time, Christianity was open only to Jews. It was a Jewish following. There were debates between Paul or Saul and Peter as to open it or not to open it. But at that stage of history, first of all, you had to be a Jew to be allowed into the fellowship. When Peter goes to the house of Cornelius in Caesarea, miracles take place, including the visiting of the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, and Simon Bar Yonah, or Peter, says, oh, now I get it. The vision I had is that you, Cornelius, can become one of us without having to follow our dietary laws or get circumcised or become Jewish. You can join the believers following Jesus Christ. And thus, Cornelius, you could say, becomes the very first, definitely the very first non-Jewish or Gentile Christian. And all this happens from the vision that Peter has on the rooftop of Simon the Tanner. Now, following the Christian period, of course, we have Hadrian's time and then the Byzantine period. Here you're looking at the church that is purportedly built on the house of Talitha or Tabitha, where she is resurrected by Peter, and it's obviously a Spanish design belonging to the Franciscans, a beautiful church in Jaffa. And following the Byzantine period, of course, there was an earlier Byzantine site there. This is the inside of the church with a beautiful olive wood pulpit that you see there. It incidentally, of course, just like churches, this church, unlike other churches that point towards the east, heads to the west. And here there's a deep symbolism that it points to the west because of the events that happened in Jaffa that export this the belief of the followers of Jesus of Nazareth to the West. Rome, in other words. So this Byzantine period, of course, is followed by 690 by the Muslims, and the Muslims, the Crusaders, and the Crusaders, the Ottomans, and in a brief period in the Ottoman period, 1517, the Ottomans, and then in a brief period in 1799, Napoleon, and then the Ottomans are back again. But now you're looking at a slide that marks a fountain. And I want to talk a few minutes about this, a couple of minutes about this fountain. This was put up by the ruler of Jaffa in those days, and the entire area actually, a man called Abu Nabut. Abu Nabut is a nickname, the father of the club, because this ruler in 1810, 1820 had everywhere he went, he carried a big club, and anyone who wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing would be dealt with by this club. He would whack them with this club. That's why they called him the father of the club. Now, he ran a tight ship, Abu Nabut, and he was the one who had walled the city with city gates. And in fact, one of the gates, called the Jerusalem Gate, that led up towards Jerusalem, where you will find the Jaffa Gate. But he walled the city, and he built gates to the city, and then he instructed everyone in the city that nobody is to come in or out of the city after sunset. Between sunset to sunrise, the city's gates would be shut, and nobody, doesn't matter who they are, he instructed, would be allowed in or out. Abu Nabut liked to walk along the seafront. And one day he forgets himself a little bit, and outside of the city, he rushes back to try and make it before sunset, but the sun has set and he's locked outside of the gates. Legend has it that he knocks on the gates. The story goes that he bangs on the gates and says to the guards inside, "Open up, it's me, it's Abu Nabut, open up." They look at each other and they say, "Oh, he's testing us. We were told strictly nobody, and if we open the gates, we're going to cop it." So they say to him, "Sir, we're not allowed to open the gates. Your orders, no way." And Abu Nabut has to spend the night outside the gates, thirsty. And legend has it that he has this fountain built so that other unfortunates like himself won't have to go thirsty. What happened to the guards? The legend doesn't tell us, the story doesn't tell us what happened to them, whether they were given medals for following his orders or whether they were clubbed, but that's the story of that fountain outside of the gates. There's another landmark from the Ottoman period that you're going to see in the next slide, and that's the beautiful clock tower. Actually, 6 of these towers were built for the 25th anniversary of the Sultan. And these 6 towers, I'm talking about 6 towers in what was then Palestine, Ottoman Palestine. One in Jerusalem, one in Sfat, one in Nablus, one in Acre, one in Haifa, and of course this one in Jaffa. The one in Jerusalem you can't see anymore. The rest are still there, at least some of them with surviving quite well, and others the foundations of in the first or second story. The one in Jaffa is actually in pretty good condition. It's been renovated a couple of times, but this one was built by the Sultan, of course, commissioned by the Sultan, but the clockwork, a Viennese clockmaker was recruited to put in the clockwork, and he wanted to put 4 faces of the clock, 2 showing the time in Palestina, as this country was named then, and the other 2 showing the time in Vienna, because he wanted everyone to know what time it was in Vienna. The story goes that the very same clockwork is operating the clocks to this day, and they're absolutely accurate at least twice a day. In the next slide, you're going to see a beautiful sculpture from modern times of Dan Caffrey, the sculpture that he calls the Statue of Faith. I'm going to do this quickly. He's probably got his inspiration from the Ramses Arch, but you can see three elements here. And I'm going to start with the oldest. To the left, you see an older person holding up a younger person for sacrifice. And this is, of course, the story of Abraham and Isaac and the near sacrifice, with the ram down below. And you'll see on the next slide the ram's face, the ram down below, caught in the thicket. And why is this a story of such faith? Well, to take your firstborn, your only son, not only son, I'm sorry, but your own son, and be prepared to sacrifice him because God said so, is a pretty strong show of faith. But, you know, many people don't realize that Isaac wasn't a young infant at those times. Biblical scholars will tell you he was around 30. And for a 30-year-old to allow his older, perhaps more feeble father to bind him and to take a knife to him because God said so is a pretty strong showing of faith. I'm going to go out of chronological order with the next element, the crossbar up on top. And what you're seeing here, of course, you can recognize the priests and the ram's horns and so on. And this is the story of the walls of Jericho that come tumbling down with the noise on the seventh time that Joshua takes them around the walls and tells them, shout, for the Lord has given you a city. And they're marching around unarmed with noisemakers around city walls that have guards armed on top of it. Big show of faith. But the last element is, I have to say, my favorite, and you'll see it in just a second in the next slide. You can see a figure with wings and a human figure and human anatomy here and there, and you can make out a struggle, a wrestling match. And this is, of course, the story of Jacob and his struggle with the angel of God. And you may remember that at the end of this struggle, Jacob gets a new name. You know that Jacob is not a very complimentary name. He came the second of twins after Esau, holding on to Esau's heels, and thus is called in Hebrew, Yaakov, comes on the heels of. And this poor guy goes through life being called, you came on the heels of. But here he gets a new name, Yisrael, which means struggle with God. Yisrael, test God. And guess what? We adopt this name for ourselves because each morning we go out, we struggle with God. We struggle to remain a democracy as well as a Jewish state. Some would think that this might be an oxymoron, but it's a careful, balanced juggling act to make sure that we remain a democracy and a Jewish state, a real struggle. We struggle to remain a united people, when on one extreme we have the ultra-Orthodox, the Neturei Karta, who don't recognize Israel and want it destroyed so that the Messiah can rebuild. And on the other hand, the extreme left that say we stole this land and it doesn't belong to us, and young Israelis sometimes even go overseas and talk about how they won't serve in the army because it's not right, and everything in between. And we struggle to remain a united people. But our biggest struggle, I must say, is when we send our young sons and daughters to guard the borders and the gates of the country. What do you tell your children? You tell them, of course, never forget that you're dealing with human beings, but always be on your guard. That would be, I would say, one of our biggest struggles. And it's a beautiful, beautiful sculpture. The Statue of Faith, Dan Caffrey, standing right above an artificial hill that was created by the British to control the riots in Jaffa in the 19-teens, just above the Ramses Gate. Now, this might be an opportunity as we head to a video over Jaffa while we watch. This is sunset in Jaffa, and we're going to see a short video while we can talk, questions, answers, discussion, whatever you like, while we view. This is sunset at Jaffa, of course. And while we watch this video, if there's any questions, please, Wayne, this might be a good time.
Yeah, Reuven, there was a question, and then we should, after this, probably jump into Tel Aviv. There was a question about why you referred, your reference point to the Jonah story was from Acts rather than from the book of Jonah.
No, it's from the book of Jonah. My reference to Acts was with Christianity and Simon the Tanner.
Ah, okay.
Oh, if I said Acts, it's slip of the tongue. Jonah was from the Israelite people period 800 years, 900 years before Acts.
Wow, that's some view.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you see the lighthouse. That's very close to Simon the Tanner's rooftop house, just in between the lighthouse and the minaret that's going to come into view now. And we're looking down on top of the house of Simon the Tanner there. Of course, you're seeing the port of Jaffa here. Any other questions in the meantime, Wayne?
No, I think people are riveted, Reuven, from the history, which I think a lot of people don't know about. A lot of people know the bustling and exciting views. A lot of people go to Jaffa to take their wedding photos, and it's always such a beautiful and scenic place. But you really steeped it in the history. But in all these pictures, even the one you showed of the statue, and the one we're looking at now, you see modern Tel Aviv right behind it. And,
yes, you do. And you're
as you said, they're sort of joined at the hip. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, that very short walk or cab ride between the two cities.
Absolutely. I'm going to do that in just a moment. But have a look here at the church, the Franciscan church. As I said, the very Spanish influence of the Spanish order of the Franciscans. The church that is called St. Peter's because it is built where Peter resurrects Talitha. And here you're looking at Tel Aviv.
Somebody did want to know if Abulafia Bakery is still there in Jaffa. So.
Oh, yes, it is, indeed. I don't know if you've ever been, any of you, during Passover to Jaffa. And if you are, you can't get anywhere near Abulafia on the last day of Passover, when leavened bread is allowed again. People just stop their cars in the middle of the road and jump out and go and buy pastries from Abulafia.
Reuven, Orna is asking about the name of the hill where the statue is located.
The name of the hill is, I don't think it actually has a hill. It's an artificial hill that was scraped up by the Brits to put a control point on top of, where in the 1920s there wasn't a hill there. It's an artificially created hill where the Brits had a command post on top to take control of the riots that were happening in Jaffa in the 1920s. And the next slide, of course, is the view of Tel Aviv from Jaffa. And here we're going to launch right into our story of Tel Aviv, born of Jaffa. Tel Aviv, the city that never sleeps. The first thing I want to tell you about Tel Aviv is where it gets its name from. You know, in 1906, after 2 attempts of the Jews, I have to tell you that Jaffa became terribly, terribly crowded. Not able to support the numbers of people there. The Jewish waves of immigration from Eastern Europe and from everywhere else first stopped in Jaffa, and many stayed in Jaffa, and Jaffa became a very crowded city, unable to give quality of life to all there. So there were 2 breakaways from Jaffa as suburbs of Jaffa in the later mid-1800s of Nave Tzedek, and perhaps in our future visit to the area in Tel Aviv, we can talk a little bit more about Nave Tzedek, and then Nave Shalom. And then in 1909, 214 Jewish families pool their monies together, send an emissary to go and buy lands outside of Jaffa, to the south of Jaffa, and they want to build a new suburb, outside of Jaffa, divorced from Jaffa. And these emissaries have to go, of course, to Damascus and to Beirut to buy land. That's a long story of why the landowners were actually in Damascus and Beirut and not the people who were here on some orchards, but most of the land they purchase is sand dunes. And it is these sand dunes from 1909 onwards that develop into a city. How do they do it? Well, here what you're looking at are the representatives of the families at a lottery, because, you know, we Jews can be troublesome sometime. 214 families have pooled their monies together. Who gets which lot? Who gets which plot? The only way to do it, of course, was randomly by lottery. So Akiva Weiss, who you see standing above the crowd there, sends some boys to the seafront, which is not far from where they're standing, to collect gray shells and white shells. And on these shells, the numbers of the plots are written and the number of the family in the list written. And in this way, the family lots are divided, the plots are divided to each family to build their house. And they decide to call their new suburb, that's going to be a marvel. It's going to have street lamps. It's going to have running water. And it's going to be a marvel of a suburb, not a suburb, but a separate entity to Jaffa. And they name it Ahuzat Bait. Ahuzat Bait in Hebrew simply means housing community. Not a really good name for a city that wants to be a real city. So they have to choose another name. Now, there was a lot of discussion. Some people suggested Herzliya. Eventually, there is a Herzliya, but some people suggested then to call their city Herzliya. Others wanted to call it New Jaffa. And then someone suggested a suggestion that was accepted. Why don't we adopt the title of a pamphlet that was written by Theodor Herzl? And this pamphlet, a booklet, was actually is launching into the whole idea of the feasibility of a Jewish state. And he called it, and you'll excuse my terrible German pronunciation, Alt-Neuland, the old new land, direct translation. But the Hebrew translator, Sokolov, who needed to translate it already in the later part of the 1800s for the Hebrew readers, because Hebrew was already being spoken and read and written, and he wanted to translate it poetically. He didn't want the literal translation. And you know, in Israel, when we want to name something, where do we go? We go to the Bible. That's where we get our names from. And Sokolov found one obscure mention of a town called Tel Aviv in the book of Ezekiel, in a list of towns, very doesn't stand out in any way, but the name stood out to him. And he said, wow, Tel Aviv, old new land, because Tel is ancient. Mark Twain says you cannot get any older than a Tel. And Aviv in Hebrew is the spring, a new beginning. So Sokolov translates Alt-Neuland to a new beginning for an ancient people, Tel Aviv, and the residents of Ahuzat Bait, whether they actually had any idea that the name actually was taken out of the Bible, decide to adopt the name of the translated pamphlet, Tel Aviv. Once they have a name like that, now they have to start building the city. And in the next slide, you're going to see how they did it. After years of exile and years of being in anything but building and farming and so on, these Jewish pioneers are finding themselves building the land. Now, these guys that you see there are called wheelbarrowers. That's what their nickname was. They were called the wheelbarrowers. And one could immediately tell. I don't see too much of a variety of them there, but some pictures actually have three types of laborers there. Some dressed the way you see these, totally covered up, with long sleeve shirts and hats and so on. Others scantily covered up, but brown, and others totally bare chest, red as lobsters. And the story goes that you could tell who were the newies, the new pioneers, who were the old-timers, and who were those who were becoming old-timers. Obviously, the new ones were the ones who got very quickly burnt by our hot sun here and became red, and then they became experienced, and in transition to becoming old-timers, would super dress up, cover themselves up totally, and once they became accustomed to the conditions here, they would be brown and working as laborers, flattening the sand dunes, scraping away the excess sand so that one could get to the rock foundation that is all over Israel, actually. But, you know, in a particular street where, incidentally, the very lottery takes place, very close to a very famous house that I'm going to be showing you, ran a deep gully. A deep, deep gully. And you couldn't build on the slopes of the gully or down the bottom of the gully. No one wanted it. So those weren't lots that were given. So the street, of course, would have to be very wide. And all you could build on this gully that was the recipient of all the sand taken from both sides of the gully and dumped into the gully would be something like this kiosk. So that is why some of the streets in Tel Aviv, the oldest of the streets, like Rothschild Boulevard, that you see now in the 50s, Rothschild Boulevard are the widest to this day, the widest streets of Tel Aviv, because the street itself is a landfill of sand. And you can notice that the kiosk is in the same place, renewed here and there, and you're going to see another couple of pictures of the kiosk later on, in the same place, in the middle of this landfill. There you go. A pedestrian walkway on both sides of the kiosk, and the street, of course, one way, one side, and the other side coming in the opposite direction. One of the widest streets in Tel Aviv. The kiosk is still there. Now, Tel Aviv had a mayor, and you're going to see him, I hope, in the next slide. Here he is. Mayor Dizengoff was his name. And whenever I talk about him, I have to smile and remember Catch-22, because he becomes mayor, the first mayor of Tel Aviv, Mayor Dizengoff. And he is on his horse across a building, not by chance. He was the first mayor of Tel Aviv, and that's the plot that he gets from the lottery, very close to where the draw was. And he builds his house there. His house didn't look like that at first, of course, one story at first. And then another story takes place. He's quite a legendary figure in Israel's early history, and a much loved mayor of Tel Aviv. But when his wife passes away, he decides to leave his child. They didn't have children except for this house. He decides to leave his child to the city of Tel Aviv, becoming an art gallery. And his house becomes an art gallery. It's uniquely built to sort of, the inside of the house is sort of low down and on bedrock in the below. And his house becomes an art gallery. This art gallery on the 14th of May, 1948, is chosen to house a very important meeting. Meeting, did I say? An incredible event. Secret notices are sent to the invitees to come for the declaration of Israel's independence. See how high the windows are? That's because this building is actually sunk. That's why it was chosen. It's almost like a bunker. They left some of the artwork up, but the rest is quickly converted into a meeting hall where at 2 o'clock on the 14th of May, 1948, Ben-Gurion gathers the provisional government and some invitees and declares Israel's independence about 10 hours before the end of the British mandate, because the Brits, some people think purposely, subjected their end of the mandate on a Friday midnight, which meant that it's the Sabbath, and thus everything would be frozen until Sunday morning, and goodness knows what would happen in between. And Ben-Gurion decided, well, we're not going to let that stop us. We'll declare independence to be put into effect on Friday midnight. And thus he was able to overcome the obstacle that would almost have stopped Israel being declared an independent country. And here the Declaration of Independence takes place in this hall that today, of course, wow, I'm reading some of the chats and wow, you can be proud of him. Today, of course, many visitors come to Independence Hall. It's undergone several renovations, but it is an incredible place to visit. And you'll see in the next slide that people actually come and visit this site. And you shouldn't miss it when you're here either. Now, you know, we are running out of time, so what we're going to do now is, and this is really not instead of a proper tour of Tel Aviv, which we'll defer to another date, a more detailed tour of Tel Aviv, but just to give you a glimpse of some of the buildings that you will see around Tel Aviv, and some of them actually in Rothschild Boulevard itself, as we flip through these slides of the Bauhaus, and maybe perhaps next time we can talk about Bauhaus architecture and how and why Tel Aviv has more than 400 heritage buildings of this sort, the largest collection of this type of architecture in all of the world. And there's a very good reason, of course, because the architect who graduated from the school that was closed in the later 1930s by the Nazis because it was liberal, too liberal, didn't get a chance to plan their buildings anywhere in Europe because, you know, an architect would have to wait a long while before someone would trust him to build a building. But here in Palestine, in Palestina, before independence, there weren't that many architects, and the ones that managed to escape Europe and come here to Palestina got their chance to build buildings the way they learnt, and thus Tel Aviv becomes the world's capital of Bauhaus style building. You'll see some of these buildings actually in Rothschild Boulevard. I want to show you particularly the last one before we go to our movie that'll give us a chance to answer some questions. Yes, it is the old City Hall. Tel Aviv City Hall, that is, as you can see, also Bauhaus style with the curves. And here, these are heritage buildings that whose facades cannot be changed. But of course, you can do whatever you want on the inside. This is one of the more spectacular ones. And this one I added just for fun. I mean, it has a touch of Bauhaus, but here is Gaudi and Bauhaus going crazy together. Now, we're going to have a short video of a 1-mile bicycle ride down Rothschild Boulevard. And it starts from Herzl Street, of course, and those of you familiar, that the cross street. Along here, we're crossing Herzl Street now into Rothschild Boulevard. Notice the kiosk as we pass by. We haven't passed it yet, but we will, as we ride along this very wide street. And here we are by Independence Hall to the right, and the monument to the founders. Here's the kiosk. That's why we came back to show you the kiosk. Once again, we passed by Independence Hall, where the flags are, and the monument to the founders. If there are any questions, this might be a good time, because I don't know if...
yeah, we're coming up on the end of the hour. There are quite a few comments, and a question that came in on Facebook back about the statue in Jaffa. Someone was asking about when that statue was actually created, and a lot of people really didn't know about its interpretation and significance. Really appreciated that story.
Yeah. Dan Caffrey, if I remember rightly, in the late 80s or early 90s, late 80s. I'll find out exactly. But Dan Caffrey is the artist, the sculptor, and it is a beautiful sculpture.
There was also a question that about your story about the lottery for the property, wondering if there are still people that own the property today that aside from Mayor Dizengoff that actually still live in the property that from that lottery.
I'm sure there are. I don't know how many, but of course a couple of generations already. But I'm sure they are. I would have to look into the records of the founders of Tel Aviv, but the family names are listed, 214 of them, if I remember rightly.
Well, I won't try to summarize everything in the chat, but people today have shared stories of everything from that kiosk that you showed on the boulevard to the Bauhaus architecture that indeed is worthy of its own episode about just the architecture of Tel Aviv and the White City that today has inspired so many different celebrations and artistic sort of creations and creative people that come there to celebrate it. So again, Reuven, this has been a wonderful virtual tour today, and we know it doesn't make up for coming and visiting and celebrating in Tel Aviv directly, but with your support and the support of our friends at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we've been able to continue this series. We have another one coming up next month with you for another virtual tour, and really just grateful for the opportunity to not just see the pictures, but to peek behind the curtain a little bit and understand a little bit about the origins, the recent origins from the history, and then in the case of Jaffa, obviously the ancient origins as well of this great city and region. So I just want to close now with a couple of quick announcements about what's coming up and what's around the corner. First and foremost, we are headed into the last week of this very generous match from the Milch Foundation for support of our webinar series. And we have until the end of the month. It's been so kind and heartwarming for those of you that have sent us small checks and large checks, or come to the website and shared a gift. All of those gifts up to $1,000 are being matched dollar for dollar. So we're grateful. This is the last week of the match, and your support is really greatly appreciated. Secondly, for those of you that know about the America-Israel Friendship League, every fall we run our Partners for Democracy award ceremony. And indeed, the fact that we can't congregate in New York City as we have done for many years does not mean we're not going to continue this incredible tradition. This is also the largest fundraiser for our organization, and you'll be hearing about it because we're going to do some things that, frankly, as they say, crisis creates opportunities as well. So with a little bit of magic, we are going to take people virtually to, we can't take you to the Plaza Hotel in New York, but we're going to take you to the King David in Jerusalem. So stay tuned for some details about what that virtual experience is going to look like. It's going to be very different than any Zoom call you've ever experienced. So we hope you'll join us for that. And that's 2 weeks from now on Sunday, November 8th. And my final announcement is about next week, because here in the United States, many of you know that next Saturday night is Halloween in the United States. It may seem and be celebrated very differently this year, but if you just hold out and you don't eat any of that junk food on Saturday night for Halloween, on Sunday, we have a program called Just Desserts. And it will be with two prominent bakers, one in Israel, one in New York, who will be sharing some great recipes that it's worth holding out for. And there will be babka. So please join us next Sunday. It'll be a lot of fun. And again, it's part of our Friends Indeed series, where we are bringing our communities together so that indeed we can enjoy one another's company, even when we can't be together physically. Everyone have a safe and wonderful week. Reuven, thanks again to you from Israel.
Thank you, and shalom, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.